passed. So a couple things. One thing we did confirm with the city attorney is that any lighting that is in a city, county, or state right-of-way is exempt from this ordinance.
Okay.
So any street lighting, pretty much all the lights downtown, things like that, those are exempt from this ordinance.
Okay.
Additionally, when it comes to the legal nonconforming, so lights that, we'll say are in a, B4 district right now, our maximum initial is, say, at 15, 25 if it's fully recessed, and it's 30 right now, so making it legal nonconforming. That kind of it comes into what is the state statute gives a little sense for interpretation.
Okay.
My personal interpretation that if you're going to change the light bulb, you're not necessarily changing the pole, and it wouldn't make you become a shorter pole.
Right, okay.
It's the same thing we do with signage. We have different sizes of pylon signs that are maybe over the 25-foot maximum, but if you are just resurfacing the sign, you're not changing the actual dimensions of the pole. We don't make them change the pole. Now, if you are actually going to tamper with the pole or adjust the pole itself in any way, then it would have to comply.
Then it would have to comply. Okay.
And our ordinance, and one last thing I'd like to add, our non-conforming ordinance does cover that, say, as tornado were to go in town and rip 3 poles out, the poles can be replaced as is. So we also have kind of that natural disaster,
Okay.
we'll call it the acts of God ordinance clause, where something else comes in and takes it out. Just the same thing a house. If a non-conforming house burns down, you can build it as it was.
Very good.
Mr. Chair, and
Yes,
that would be an in-kind replacement, right? is
Yes,
kind of
in-kind
the way to look at
replacement.
that? Okay.
Very good. Other questions for David? Hearing none, let's open a public hearing at 6:19. Anybody that wish to address the commission, please come forward. Name and address, of course.
Sure. Let me just adjust the microphone here just a little minute. I'm shorter than the last speaker. Matt Killian, I'm the president of the Brainerd Lakes Chamber of Commerce. I live in 7985 Travis Trail in Fort Ripley Township with a Brainerd address. First of all, I want to just say thank you for revisiting the initial version of the ordinance draft. We took a look at this at our Government Affairs Committee on Monday. Mr. Chansky was there to translate it and answer a few questions, which we greatly appreciated as well. The chamber and the business community, this has caught our attention. It's been well covered. There's significant concerns that remain. Mostly, we're looking at, what is the goal? What's the goal of this particular ordinance and why are we changing? And the way that we understand the goal is it's about property owner rights, right? You don't want your property to be lit up like noon when it's midnight, and completely understand that. And as we've talked to a number of people that have prompted this, it's also about maintaining Brainerd's dark skies so we can look up in the summer and see all the night skies. And, there's a lot of business people that agree with those goals. I mean, those are very noble goals. From the chamber, our goals really are about promoting economic development, not throwing additional barriers to attract development. We're very pro-Brainerd. We like a lot of the things that we've seen happen, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, and we want to continue that momentum. The other thing is about additional expense for a business that is looking to build or expand a parking lot. And so the concerns that remain really are around the heights. We seem to be focused a lot on the heights of the poles, which that adds the most expense as we're building a parking lot. If there's more poles, it's more expense, tens of thousands of dollars. In lots of cases, that's not rare. And then the other thing is there's safety concerns and concerns with snow plowing and things of that nature, and we see that even today as I cleaned off my truck after sitting out there all day long. But so what we were looking at was this standard of the LED technology coupled with this 90-degree cutoff isn't that a significant improvement over what's there already? Do we have to fiddle with some arbitrary heights to the poles, which adds expense and creates barriers to economic development? That's where the concerns lie. You know, it seems to me that if based on what you were just saying, if the standard is I can't see the bulb or the light, however that's defined, doesn't matter if the pole's 13 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, 25 feet, and to put these arbitrary height restrictions on zones really doesn't necessarily take in consideration the unique needs of that particular business. The other thing that we keep on wondering about, and we believe that there must be a reason for this 13 feet. We continue to scratch our heads about where 13 feet's coming from. I can't get an answer on that. Seems very arbitrary or very specific. You know, why 13 feet? Is that a number that's, you know, specifically there for a reason? It's always concerning when you're talking about business districts. Anybody that takes deliveries from a semi-truck, the semi-truck trailer height's 13 and a half. So it's lower than that. So that's another concern as well. So I'm talking more generically tonight just to say, number one, thank you for the improvements on the ordinance, but two, that there continues to be significant concerns that I'm hearing as the Chamber of Commerce president and that we're discussing in our Government Affairs Committee, and I just want to relate that to you. I know a lot more about lighting today than I did a couple of months ago, so maybe some degree of thanks is now can answer those trivia questions a little bit better, but we're taking it seriously and we want to work with you as best as we can.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Killian, as long as we have an opportunity?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Killian. I'm wondering, the example of the delivery truck.
Yeah.
Would you find that the allowance in the ordinance for a light fixture to be attached to the building to sufficiently address that concern that you're not necessarily having lighting on the driveway, but in most applications we're actually lighting those delivery
The
areas
bays
with,
or whatever,
with
yeah.
building lighting, down lighting from the building. Do you think that this ordinance adequately addresses that concern by having that higher standard tied to the building or the structure versus that controlled height of the mast? If you
On
were
the
to have it separate?
the freestanding versus attached to the building. So you're asking whether I think that the 13 feet attached to the building is,
Not 13
No.
feet attached to the
Okay.
building, but independent. You can have a higher light on the structure
Mm-hmm.
that typically those are illuminating loading docks and those sorts of things.
correct? Yep.
And so the example of a delivery vehicle backing up to a building seems like that's already covered in the ordinance. There wouldn't be that opportunity for conflict with a 13-foot, 20-foot, whatever
Yeah.
mast. What are your thoughts on
No,
that?
well, you know, I think every business is different. To the extent that you have to navigate a parking lot to get to the loading dock, that's where some of these freestanding things come into play. And that's where we've had some of our members, you know, even, I think I've showed you photos which from a gas station canopy, but you had the chief saying the same thing. People hit things when they're low. So those are the things that come back over and over again. But I think more than the damage is, the concern is around the additional expense that it potentially could take to light a lot. And the question or consideration would be, is there a way to accomplish the goal of protecting those adjacent property owner rights without adding significant additional expense for a business owner that wants to invest in Brainerd? That's really what the primary concern is. And again, just to reiterate, are there ways to address that through this technology that's way less expensive than adding, you know, more freestanding poles within a parking lot?
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right,
All right, thank you.
very good. Nothing, Teresa? All right, very good. If there are, with no other questions, any other speakers would like to, no? No, Jennifer? No, Ashley? All right, great. We'll close the public hearing at 6:21, I think I'm looking at. 6:27. All right, discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Please.
I'm going to address right now, I'm going to address the activity of the new one about 90 minutes after
Okay.
the activity. I agree with with David that I think we should just remove that. It's something that we could look at later. And the reason I'm going to say that is because the technology, like the high school, I'm sure there's going to have a computerized where if you want to shut it down at 1 o'clock, you could probably do it from your phone. You don't have to come into the building. But there's a lot around here that is not the case. I think as technology advances to that degree where you don't have to physically come into the facility, that would be sometime we should look at it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
may I address Commissioner Lambert? Just clarification, are you saying you don't want the under exemptions number E?
E,
You don't want
correct.
that in there either? Is that your discussion?
That's the one, yeah, the shut off within, that's the one I think we could remove at this time.
And just a clarification, that is only for athletic facilities?
Yeah, this one,
Yeah,
just for,
okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Clarification, okay.
So then that means we're not exempting?
So in
athletic
this
facilities?
situation, how I would, if the commission were to consider what Commissioner Lambert is saying, what would, the fix would just, my recommended fix would be just to strike for E, just to read outdoor athletic facilities.
and
And then strike the actual,
the shut off
the
within.
shut off. Because then, again, the reason that was added, just as a reminder, is something that was brought up, and I think actually Mr. Killian might have brought it up in a phone call with me with the initial ordinance, was right now our ordinance actually does not address outdoor athletic facilities such as ballparks, football fields. And so what that would mean is they actually would have to meet the standard of the zone which they are in. And obviously, football fields, baseball fields, a lot of times they take a little bit of a higher light because of, they've got high stands or things like that to light them up. So, if you have if the standard is 15 feet, obviously that's not good enough for a baseball field. So again, here, this situation would be we're exempting those facilities, and with that, again, the 90-minute thing initially that was something that I have seen in other ordinances, and that's just to keep from what you'll see, you go down the cities, Target Field's lit up 24/7, keep things from that, football field doesn't need to be lit up at 3 a.m.
But, Mr. Chair, and the answer to follow up on that even more is our, like softball and baseball, they already shut it off after the activity. But I guess I was looking more like at the schools and they come back from that. I just think we should, I don't think the technology is at the point.
This isn't covering parking lots, just to be clear.
Oh, this doesn't cover?
No, this is outdoor athletic facilities.
Item E.
Item E. There was at the very end of this ordinance, there was an item 515.
I'm confused, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, there was an item 51518
Parking lots.
-5 that was, I think, .7 that we initially had that
Okay.
stated parking lots. That has already been completely removed, so you
Oh,
don't even see
good,
that in
okay.
your ordinance.
Well, then I forget what I said.
Okay, that's why I was just asking for clarification. This is
Yeah.
purely athletic facilities like
These-
ball fields.
Okay, then I apologize that I misspoke.
Other discussion? All right. Before we move on to an ordinance, do we need to formally, if somebody would like to make a motion, I think we need to we're striking E, correct? Is that what we're doing?
No,
Or
that's
we're
not what I heard.
No, I think,
leaving E there?
I rescinded.
happy with the-
Yeah, I'm happy,
okay.
and now I was
Good.
thinking parking
All
lots.
right, very good.
so again, I think I'll just quickly cover for our new commissioner here, the process, if you didn't know it already. What would happen is the commission obviously will vote tonight whether or not to take into account the comments made, make adjustments, or pass it on to the city council. The city council will then, is scheduled, body preliminary, placed on the council agenda for the 21st, that is next Tuesday. Council's meeting on Tuesday because Monday is a holiday. At that meeting, they will conduct their first reading. or vote to conduct the first reading of the ordinance. If they conduct the first reading, the second reading would happen at the first council meeting in February, which I believe is the 6th. 3rd, thank you, 3rd. February 3rd. They'd conduct the second reading on February 3rd, and then at that time, vote to adopt.
Very good.
Mr. Chair, I'd like
Yes.
to just offer some comments at the public hearing, and now many moons ago, right? Was it October? I think that we had our public hearing on this previously. We had some really robust discussions, some great input from the public and the business community and the school district. And as a result of that, I think in early November, we did a very thorough review of that input and accommodating that input into the draft that we quite frankly moved forward in November. And now this is an additional response to public input that we received in November. I feel this is a very good ordinance proposal. I'm strongly in favor of this and look forward to voting to move this on to the city council. I think sort of the key points of movement that, an insight that we gained from the public input in October was the one-size-fits-all was not practical. And that is language that we heard strong, and I believe quoting directly, one-size-fits-all was not cutting it. And this ordinance now allows, without an additional process, another key piece that we heard from the business community was, don't make us come in for a conditional use permit. And so this draft gives a means of being able to have something different than the base standard without a conditional use process by taking additional measures of making sure that we have cutoffs. I think that's an extremely important key piece and a great response from this planning commission to address the genuine and real concerns of our business community, of our institutions, and our public. So I think that we've really hit this squarely on the head here and are driving this in, and I'm pleased by the work. I'm grateful for all the public comments we've received that have helped us tune this further and further and sharpen this so that it's the good ordinance that it is today. So I look forward to making that motion to approve this and move this on to city council approval.
And I'll second it.
So that was a motion and that was a second. All right, discussion.
Yeah.
All right, very good.
Mr. Chair, and I do think we do have the ability to adjust that light height in this ordinance, and I think what do they call standalone? Or standalone lights? That they call standalone?
Yeah, we'll call
Yeah.
it that.
Okay, standalone lights. And it took me a while, but I can see that a 13-foot in the Thrifty White area next to residential is very respectful. Looks very nice. We don't have a farm of tree poles, light poles. So I have come around, and I do think 13 feet is good, especially on our business, especially if it's close to residential, whether it's residential or the B1s, B2s. I also have some personal experience of lights that are high coming into bedrooms. So I do understand that. So I think it's an excellent ordinance. I think we did a very good job. And 10 years from now, 5 years from now, the environment changes.
Very good.
Okay.
And when this originally went to the city council, the feedback from the president of the city council, Mr. Johnson, was, there was room for compromise. It was, they rejected it, but it wasn't like never come back. It was like work through the process, work to a compromise, bring it back. And I feel we've done that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's too restrictive, and I like that we got rid of the conditional use permit
Sure.
requirement.
Sure.
Yeah, our staff can do the decision being at our staff level, it doesn't have to come through.
Right.
the
Good, a
chair.
good level to do it at.
Yeah.
Very good. Without any, if that, it would be all the discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Very good. We are sending that to the city council. Very good.
When will that be on their agenda?
So that will be on the agenda on Tuesday, the 21st, so next Tuesday. One comment I will make that was made, I think, at that initial council meeting in October by a few of the council members, and I think Commissioner Marone actually made it also before, is that there was no member, other than Commissioner Lambert and myself, there's no member of the commission at that meeting. So if there are any members of this commission that would like to attend that meeting, you are welcome to do. That meeting is at 7:30. With that being said, I do stress, if the commission wants members to attend, they kind of pick who's going to be attending, just to avoid any concerns of a quorum attending the council meeting.
Oh, got it.
So,
And you just gave me that date, and I was, what was the date again on that?
Tuesday the 21st,
Thursday, the 21st?
so that is next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. I think I'm going to be at city council. Anybody else would have plans to attend on the 21st?
I would plan to, but would yield.
Well, if it's just you and I, we're not a quorum.
correct.
And I'm going to be there for another matter that evening. So I think
And I think
that's,
that would be appropriate, having the chair and the vice chair
Very good.
representing the commission.
I like it. All right, that moves us to, what does this move it to? We are 6B. This would be a zoning code update.
Yes.
David?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As was discussed in 2019, one of the things that I know I was tasked with when I was first hired by the city and the commission started to work through is really looking at our zoning code and updating it. Like many cities, Brainerd it's not unique in that in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, cities started to adopt more uniform zoning codes, kind of what I would call cookie cutter codes. Brainerd was not unique in doing the same thing. However, the issue is that those codes didn't necessarily, each community is different, has different characteristics, has different history, and does not necessarily address the community. And we've seen that through rezoning requests we've had, through variance requests and things like that, where we have a community, especially when you look at our residential districts, we have, I think it's roughly about 50%, over 50% of our housing stock was built before 1940. What that means is they were built prior to current zoning standards, and now we're trying to pigeonhole them and fit them into, essentially, as I put in my memo here, trying to fit, 19th century building standards into 21st century zoning code standards. And so one of the things we started to work on in 2019 was, how do we want to address this? A subcommittee was formed. The committee met a few times. At that time, it was myself, Commissioner Duval, Commissioner Lambert, and then Commissioner Marone met and figured, okay, how do we want to address this? First of all, one thing that was decided was, one, we probably want to look at the entire code, not just bits and pieces, but the entire code would be good. But to start, we want to start with a foundation. And that foundation, if you remember, started with the idea of moving more towards what we call a form-based code. Our current code is what I would call more of a use-based code, where within a district, we say these uses, you can do these things within this district, and here's the permitting process for these things. If it's not listed, you can't do it. What a form-based code looks at is less of what are you doing and more of, I will say, how are you doing it? What is the facility in which you are doing it, how does it sit? If you have a building, how does it sit on the land? Looking at things like parking standards, if you have so many employees, what are your operational hours, things like that for commercials, and then kind of managing you that way. And then if you meet those standards, we don't necessarily care what you do. And so this subcommittee started to kind of build, a nice little foundation, looking at potential zoning districts. What could potential zoning districts look like? How would we potentially classify these districts? And part of it, this code update, the goal of it really is to streamline our code. If Commissioner, if you would like to hold up your little binder that you were provided,
Oh, this,
that one,
this,
you can see that code is quite thick. It's a little cumbersome.
The health hazard to carry around.
And it's all words. As you all know, it is all words. And so looking at a code that is much more user-friendly on the end user, especially for residents that aren't necessarily have degrees in planning, a code that uses a lot more illustrations to help people see. We are visual beings, and it's a lot easier to understand when we're talking about just like lighting. It's a lot to understand what is a 90-degree cutoff and things like that when I actually can see an illustration of what that looks like. So really the goal is to make it more user-friendly on the user end, while also making it, I think, development-friendly. Your zoning code, when you look at developments, and I work with developers regularly, people that either want to move their business into Brainerd or already in Brainerd and want to move somewhere else, one of the first things developers will look at is your code. Before they even contact you, they will look at your code, and if it seems restrictive or cumbersome to them, they just won't even pick up the phone and call. So we also want to make it development friendly. And finally, but we still want a code that keeps the culture and the history of Brainerd. We don't want to turn Brainerd into something that it's not. We want to keep that culture, again, of our neighborhoods. Something we're going to talk about later in our comprehensive plan that came out was neighborhood identity. We wanted to support those neighborhood identities, those the history of our neighborhoods, and we can do that through our code by while still allowing people to make improvements to their properties and keep Brainerd looking nice and a place that people want to come to live. So as you see in my memo, as part of the 2020 budget, the City Council did allocate $50,000 to the city's capital fund for updating the code. This money is specifically, again, I see it, is to bring someone on board to help guide the city through this. This is something that, could I do it? Yes. However, this is going to be a lengthy process, an intensive process, and if I were to do it, that's all I would be doing. I wouldn't be doing anything else. And additionally, there is $50,000 is preliminary placed in the capital fund for 2021, but that is, again, that's assuming that's up to council to adopt that when they adopt the 2021 budget at the end of this year. So what we wanted to I wanted to do now is just kind of have that initial discussion. Initially, my thought was I wanted to kind of get the ball rolling, bring what we call an RFQ, a request for qualifications, bring it to this commission, this meeting, so we can get it out there, get someone on board, and run right ahead. But as I thought about that, I was like, you know what, we want to do this right. So I thought this first meeting is, let's have, especially now, we have at least one new commissioner. Hopefully we'll have our final commissioner on board at sometime soon. We'll just take the time, have the commission discuss what are your personal goals of an update. What kind of things would you like to see in an update? City Administrator Jennifer Bergman is here as well to participate in this discussion. In the future, I think what we're also probably going to be seeing, maybe sometime in April, is potentially having a joint, maybe through a workshop type, a joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the City Council to have this discussion. So first, let's the commission get on kind of board of what they want to see. Then let's bring the City Council in, exchange ideas before we go out and then get someone on board and start chipping away at our zoning code. So with that being said,
Mr. Chair.
Please.
David, for the 2021, that 50,000, is it still going to be the person type thing, or are we, by that time, are we going to be into a process mode?
and part of that is,
That's what I'm.
and that's really is determined once we get someone on board. Is one, that's what we're kind of talking about. What does it really want to do? Depending on how many changes we want, if we want to essentially scrap our current code and start brand new, well, then it's going to be probably a 2-year process, and it's probably going to cost close to $100,000.
Okay.
Or are we just taking what we have, making the language more friendly, taking sections that work, leaving it, adding illustrations, that's a much smaller task, probably costs less money and will go faster. So that 50,000 in the 2021 is kind of, let's see where we are come September.
Okay,
And then we can determine, do we still need to ask council for that $50,000 to continue this in 2021? But again, as I said, I think the idea right now, after I talk to a city administrator, is let's get the commission talking, then we'll have a meeting with council, and then by April, we should know kind of where we want to go. You know, May, we'll field that RFQ, get someone on board starting the summer, and we can hit the ground running. And again, by the time we hit September, we should kind of have an idea knowing what's our track. And we'll know if we need to ask for that other 50,000 in 2021. I would anticipate that anything that is done will not be adopted until at least 2021.
And did I gather from that that the city's fiscal year is October or September?
So the city operates on an annual, so our budget goes
On a calendar
January 1 to
year, so
December
January.
31, but August is about the time we start the budgeting
Gotcha,
process.
thank you.
So the city generally sets its preliminary levy around beginning of September. So that's kind of where I'm talking about August, end of August, September, we'll want to know, kind of we'll have a feeling from once we know who we're bringing on board, what their process is, the things that they are recommending, whether or not, how much we will need to finish this project.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
one thing I can say, this is a very daunting task. I can just tell you that just on the committee that I chair on the maintenance rental code. So do you mind if I just put my input
Please,
right
I'd love
now?
to hear it. I'd love to hear it.
What I would like to see in coding is that it has to be very, very user-friendly. That, and get to the level of us non-planners. And I think that would then help overall on every aspect. Words are boring. I know we talked about doing some charts. And for this form-based, I am so excited about it. I've been spreading the word for people to be watching for it. But it's simple, and it would be nice, see that little book there that you have? I think mine is bigger. It'd be nice if we could, I don't want to say it's like, but get it to a point where, you're not going to hurt yourself. And it has to be organized in a manner that is easily understood. Does that make sense?
I like the wallet-based format myself.
True.
To go along with the comp plan wallet-based.
I
Yeah.
think kind of a flip.
pocket
Sort
guide.
of thing. But yeah, we're,
Wallet-based.
well-based, yeah, yes, you do. Yes, you do. I think an interesting question for us to look at is how much of this is going to be in terms of, obviously, form. We're going to change the form of it. How much do we want to take on the substance of it? There are a couple issues that we've never resolved from last year. One of them, of course, being the rentals, what happens with the duplex that lapses, and do we go ahead and say you're grandfathered in, even though you didn't rent out that duplex for 20 years, you can rent it again. In other words, how much of it do we want to take on those substance issues, and how much of it do we want to take on the form-based issues? So that'd be a question I would have just to kind of consider.
And I would concur with that, to vision, first of all, either what things are missing that we feel are going to be important to address. What things have we continually confronted that point to a problem in our ordinance that we ought to fix? And then, there's probably the gut check part of this as well. I indirectly received the newsletter of the Minnesota Home Builders Association. And in their most recent newsletter, they shared that the effects of zoning and over-regulation of the housing industry is crippling housing startups. I'd like to see the data. to say that, okay, where is that, how is it affecting it, and where are we in that continuum of unimpacting smart regulation in zoning and overburdensome, niggling detail, way over the top zoning and oversight, and where are we in that mix? And, so part of that is to look at that framework. I feel like I may need this year just to get my head around where do we want to go, and so is that budget best invested this year in kind of educating us as a council, a commission, and showing us the world of possibility to think about through guest speakers, to look at examples of, I need to get my head around what form-based really feels like. I can see it in principle. I've seen a brochure that we passed around last year within the commission's public, information available. I'd like to see it on the ground. I don't know how to do that without getting on a bus, or could we look at a neighborhood that says, this is pretty darn close to it. Imagine this being here. Now I can begin to feel it. So the value of some fields time, the value of some guest speakers built into our agendas to help us prepare the way. I feel like I would need that to be effective in them being able to help us launch and successfully deliver a code change or a code revision. I feel that's for me, and that may be very different for everyone else, but that's kind of what I feel I need. I don't know if we want to have form-based. I don't know if we want to have something that's fat and full of words, or add a couple of pictures to make tables to make it a little quicker to get through. Or do we want some sort of a hybrid? I don't know right yet. And I don't really know how to unpack that and guide staff or to represent the perspectives and needs of the community from the comp plan to this without maybe getting a little bit more background. So that's, if I were to make a request, I would say, let's make sure we have time to educate this council member.
Mr. Chair,
That's a very good idea.
Yes,
if I may.
please.
To Commissioner Duval's comment, I think these funds do not have to be necessarily allocated specifically to hiring a firm or contractor to just do that revision. If the commission says, I think when this was designated, it was designated for this update. So that could be, as you said, if you want to bring in some people, and I can do some research, and maybe it's from the League of Minnesota Cities or some of those other firms out there that I can guarantee you would love to come in and talk with the commission, maybe work through these, maybe hold a kind of a workshop environment, bring someone in, spend a few hours just to talk about it, just to, again, help you as a commission figure out what do you want as we prepare to eventually draft like that RFQ, that request for qualification, so we can actually tell people this is what we want, so that once we don't dive into this and 6 months down the road figure out, oh, we are way off track and we've just blown $15,000. So I would definitely say that is absolutely something we absolutely can do.
Okay.
Good, I like that too, I like that as
Thank
well. If anybody wants to Google something pretty interesting, I would suggest Minneapolis 2040. Their comprehensive plan that they adopted last year is really interesting. It really looks to, it does major things. It eliminates the whole idea of a single-family neighborhood. Which is something we've wrestled with. We have our R1s that say they're single-family, but then if you look into it, the next sentence is like, it also says, yeah, you can have duplexes in here. And Minneapolis is looking at making their city denser. They're looking at bringing in more density and really addressing the whole issue of affordable housing through density is what they're attempting to do. They eliminate the single family. They put requirements on developers to include low-income housing in their housing units, which is interesting. They look at some of the occupancy limits that we have, and I think our code probably has some of these too in terms of how many non-related people you can have and things like this. They just throw it out. They say families now aren't what families were 100 years ago. And then they move towards the built form kind of way of looking at it, trying to look at taking away height restrictions along roads. In other words, in order to build up density along your major arteries and things like this. So if you haven't Googled Minneapolis 2040, do it. and it's influencing other people too. California now is beginning to has looked at it, and I think a couple other folks on the West Coast have looked at it doing the same thing. I think there was a legislator in California that brought up the same idea of eliminating the whole idea of single-family neighborhoods and just saying no more. I know that's probably shake up people a little bit there, but there is movement. The point being that people are we're not alone in looking at changing how we're approaching this. So there's some good material out there, and I do like the idea of kind of starting maybe with an education process of bringing in some different people from different perspectives. So that's my 2 cents worth. Other input?
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Please.
I'll piggyback right off of you. I think it's good timing with Brainerd's comp plan just being passed. Opening it up, the number one priority for housing is the need for additional housing options for all different types, needs, and incomes. So exactly what you said about, was it Minneapolis 2040? That goes right into ours. Other than that, I'll hit on the user-friendly portion. I know I got very familiar with Brainerd City Code when I interned here, and it was a jungle to get through and understand it. And the user-friendly option is much needed. And I know I would also be looking at other cities' codes, and I have never seen a user-friendly one to my knowledge. They're all kind of difficult. So I think if we were one of the few or first, I think it'd be a very good step. So
Very good.
thank you.
Any other input? Not hearing input, I think maybe the next step would be, Jennifer, would you like to jump in? Anything to jump in? If you wish, love to hear your perspective.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, and actually I don't, I'm really just here to listen. David did brief me on this earlier this week, and sure sounds like an interesting concept, and I'll just be curious to see where the commission goes with that, so thank you.
Very good. So I think the next step would be to direct staff to start moving towards an education process. Would somebody comfortable making, it doesn't have to be a real formal motion, but go ahead.
I will make that motion. Would it be possible, Dave, what our little committee did, would we be able to bring that to our next meeting?
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of idea what we've done. I don't think the commission has seen that.
If you would like, what I can do for your February meeting is I can bring back kind of what that committee did earlier in 2019. And then what I also can do is try to maybe do kind of a draft, a basic draft plan of maybe a schedule. Saying, okay, we want to do, in March, we're going to bring someone in and have a talk, we're going to have more discussion. In April, we're going to sit down and have a good discussion with the city council. In February, we're going to consider an RFQ. Things like that, I can put kind of a draft schedule for you so you can review it, and then you can think, okay, does this work for us? Do we want to adjust it? Does this seem like a good timeline? Just kind of visually have something for you to kind of understand maybe what a process might look like.
And Mr. Chair, I would also ask that we invite the city council on those meetings when we do have a speaker. If somebody can come,
Oh, yeah.
all the better. Or if we want to even designate it more of a workshop type, where we could invite Baxter or anybody like that. We could open it up.
Yeah, it'd be
If
good
you think-
to get other perspectives in the area as well.
I mean, I think it's a good opportunity for us, maybe to have a movement, so,
I like it.
okay. Thank you, and so I will make the motion that, that we go ahead and,
Create a schedule?
do we want to create a
Putting
schedule?
words in your
or-
mouth, but
I
is that
know,
kinda
yeah,
what you're
help me
getting at?
out, because I'm trying to say, let's start the process, is basically, I want
Sure,
to say.
sure.
To start the process for our groundwork to complete the updates to the zoning codes.
Very good.
Second?
We have a second there. Any discussion on the motion to direct staff to begin the process?
And Mr. Chair, I'm just going to
Yes.
say one thing, and perhaps we can do some wordsmithing, and perhaps we need to get rid of the word zoning and put it as something else that would undertake what, more explain what we're doing, because I think zoning sometimes scares people. But that's just a tidbit.
You did produce something, 'cause I have this is the
That's-
zoning matrix that was produced. There
Yeah,
were-
and I
you-
think,
You did,
Bless you for
it was
still having
product.
that.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
gonna have to dig in my backpack to get it.
yeah. But no, yeah, we did.
Stuff
And
that
I think-
away.
I think it would be nice to, our thinking, our thought process on all of that. It was quite a dramatic change of thinking, so. It was good though, so too.
Very good. All right, any other discussion? If not, all in favor?
well,
Yes, please.
Proceed with your vote, I'm sorry.
You ready? All right.
Yep.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, same sign. All right.
Mr.
Very
Chair,
good.
so,
Yes, please.
I was out of sequence on that. So, maybe a potential starting point towards developing this may be, we currently have a meeting scheduled at the end of the month. I think last year we did a workshop to kind of plan the year. And this would fit very well, I think, maybe into that context where it seems like we've really loaded up January already, so it's a bit late for January, but perhaps we can think about February as a workshop month to maybe get down and lay out perhaps issues or getting us to the goal of either the end of this budget year or the budget planning year, what our full needs will be for being able to do this piece, so we're ready
Right.
to go.
I see that we're going to meet on the 19th of February, be a regular meeting. Would you be comfortable before that or after that? Anything, just kind of guess, if we went with a workshop, a planning workshop in February?
What about Mr. Chair, what about the 29th? I
Well,
know
that
we
is the
have a-
question. What kind of, maybe if you don't mind, I'm going to turn to David and say, what do you see us doing on the 29th?
So the 29th is a special meeting. So when it comes to special meetings, generally, because it's not a regular meeting, you're there to meet about generally whatever it is you called it for. The 29th specifically, as I kind of put in my email, when I polled the commission if you'd be available for the 29th. What that is we have we have a piece of land that is looking to be sold and developed. As part of the sale process, the current owner would like to go through the rezoning and platting process to begin that. And how kind of, the way that works, they kind of have a date of April 1st to get the property all set and ready to be sold to a developer. And looking at the process, you're looking at roughly a 45 to 60-day process to do a rezoning and a platting. So with that, on the 29th, this property owner would be submitting we'd be considering a rezoning of the property and then also the preliminary plat. So when it comes to platting, it's kind of a multi-step process. The first thing they do is they submit a preliminary plat, looking at these are unplatted parcels, platting them, saying this is kind of what we want the property to look like. The commission gets its initial review of it, gets to make any comments, maybe any recommended changes to that plat, makes a recommendation to the city council whether or not this preliminary looks good or we'd like to see these changes. That would happen on the 29th. The city council, the city council would then make their review of that preliminary plat on February 3rd. Then they make the final decision on, does it look good? Do there need to be changes? And then they vote on that preliminary plat. On the 19th of February, during the regular meeting, the property owner and then they also would vote on the rezoning. So obviously they hold the first reading of the rezoning on February 3rd. On February 17th, their second meeting of the month, the council would then hold a second reading and vote on whether or not to adopt that rezoning, should that move forward. So then the rezoning is done. On February 19th, during your regular meeting, you would then be considering the final plat for this property. So it has to go preliminary, go through it, make sure, and then the final comes back, addressing any questions, concerns that were made, goes to the Planning Commission on the 19th. You make a recommendation regarding the final plat to the council, then the council would approve that final plat on the 2nd. So one of the reasons we're calling this meeting the special meeting is because, again, the timeline that this property owner is looking at. They could not make it in time for this meeting, but if they waited until February to start the process, they would not be ending until the middle to end of April. So they wouldn't be meeting their kind of April 1st deadline. So that's why we were calling the special council meeting, the special planning commission meeting, to get that ball rolling so that can be developed and get that sold and then hopefully developed. So that's just kind of a little bit of idea what that is.
Okay.
Going back to the topic of, though, what originally was brought that up was a workshop. I think that's absolutely doable. So again, you are meeting on the 19th. But, you know, if you want to meet, you know, when it comes to workshops, you can meet whenever you want to. It does not have to be a Wednesday night. It does not have to be 6 o'clock on a Wednesday night. You know, if you say, you know, 4 o'clock on a Thursday works better, then we can do 4 o'clock on a Thursday. It is an open meeting, because you will have a quorum of the commission, but again, that is really up to you. You want to do it on a Saturday morning, we can do it on a Saturday morning. So it does not, I don't want to feel like the commission has to be pigeonholed, it has to be 6 o'clock on a Wednesday.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
on a workshop, I think this workshop would be nice to be done before our meeting on the 19th. So again, on the 19th, we can have that move it to, let's get going.
Yeah.
So, and I would, I'd like to see a workshop earlier.
If the
I mean, before the 19th.
If the commission would like, what I can do between now and the 29th is I can maybe put like a doodle poll, put a couple times and dates out there for the commission, see what works best for everyone. And then when we meet on the 29th, we'll have that date and then you'll just adjourn to that meeting,
Okay.
if that works for the commission.
I think that works, yeah. And I'm not averse to, the appeal of a Saturday meeting to me is that I would be a lot fresher on a Saturday morning, but I know Saturdays are set as sacrosanct, we all have our things we like to do, but David, you just put out some times and we'll develop a consensus from there.
Okay.
So, do we have a time on the 29th? Is it gonna be 6 PM? on
So
the
yes, thank you for bringing that. Due to when I polled the commission and some comments that were made, we were going to meet at 7 o'clock on the 29th.
7th and the 29th?
7 o'clock on the 29th, so it's a little different, but also still in this room. So we'll be in the county board room, 7 o'clock, the 29th.
All right.
And so while we're on that topic, the question that what I will just need is when we adjourn this meeting tonight, it'd be helpful if that motion would be to adjourn to the special meeting on the 29th. It just
Very good.
helps us cover for noticing purposes.
What kind of a detail should we expect in that plat? Is this going to be like the school district when they bring these?
No, there's
data
there's
rich or-
no buildings or anything on
Okay.
this. So it looks a lot like a survey.
Okay,
It's pretty much
okay.
a survey. So they should be submitting those documents probably tomorrow, Friday morning at the very latest, so we
Mm-hmm.
can get that publicly noticed, and then I will send it to you right away. What I also will do is I'll put the sections of the ordinance, kind of what you're looking at for a plat, and I'll put in there, because I think this will be the first time this commission's done a plat. I don't think the city's done a plat since, 18? I think the last time I've seen. It's been a while since the commission,
It's
city
been a
did a
while.
plat.
Not in my time.
So kind of an idea of what you should be looking for and things
Good.
to look
It
at.
should show all the existing conditions and then what the, in shaded,
This
and
is
then
kind of
the
what you do for a
proposed.
living?
Yeah, and then it should show all the proposed conditions bold
Okay.
over it, so you can get an idea of what contours are there, what existing
Okay.
facilities are there, and what they're proposing.
Very good.
Excellent. Okay.
I like it. So then can we say we have a plat guy on the commission then?
I do plats for a living, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's
Plat
good.
man.
Oh, a plat man. Excellent. That's good. That's good. All right. Any other comments?
So
If
do
we're
we need,
comfortable with
do
that?
we need a motion or anything?
I think we've already made
That
a
at the
motion. I
end.
think this is just
Huh?
informal discussion at this
That was
point.
informal discussion, so we're now on to 6C.
We are on to 6E, the comprehensive plan implementation, and it is just great to get this guy in our hands here today.
So the last formal thing we have for you tonight, as you know, the comprehensive plan was officially adopted, I think it was October, and you all have that, got your copies, your final copies, today. So we do have Ashley Kaisershot with Sourcewell here with us. As part of the 2020 budget, we did get Ashley's hours and scope of services expanded a little bit. So part of what she's going to be helping us with is 2020 is comprehensive plan implementation. I think it was the will of this council, this commission, as well as the city council, and we saw from the public that we don't want this document to be like the 2004 document that was purely compliance and got thrown in a drawer. We want this to be a living document. You know, the city administrator also wants this to be a living document that everything we do ties back in. So what I think that Ashley's going to be helping us with this year is how do we do that? You know, and things I've thrown out before, things like benchmarking, and how do we make sure that we're keep pressing ahead? So, Ashley?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Ashley Kaiserschott. I'm a planning and zoning specialist with Sourcewell, and I've had the great fortune to be working with the city of Brainerd the last 2 years. This will be year number 3. Time goes by really fast when you're having fun. So it's really great to see some of the familiar faces here. And Commissioner Foley, it's nice to meet you. Matt, glad to be working with you again. So 2020, new year, new plan. It's a great opportunity for you guys to get really familiar with the document that you have in front of you. The plan is meant to be living, so it's meant to not be in pristine shape. It's meant to have notes. It's meant to have some coffee stains, some resemblance that you actively are referencing and using it. When we complete a goal or we complete a policy, strike that guy out. Check it off, whatever brings you joy in terms of showing the progress of your document. When we handed the plan over to the city, we gave just a few Kickstarter ideas that can help fuel some either idea generation or just some inspiration to move forward. We encourage us to look at what are our neighboring jurisdictions doing with their plans. How do we overlap with them? How do we overlap with the city of Baxter? It's one way where we can identify shared programs or projects that we can collectively work on together. How can we learn from them? We all have successes and we all have failures. It's a great opportunity to learn from our neighbor on how can we do things better. The document that you have, again, is a working document, so please feel free to take notes in it, highlight, cross things off, put your sticky notes in it. It's also a great reference for every year. When we circle back to it, we won't forget your notes. So feel comfortable writing a new document. We encourage you to use the first year to become familiar with the goals and the policies, as well as the action items in the plan itself. You should get pretty comfortable to say, oh, I remember that policy under the transportation section. So you'll get a little bit more comfortable, and that's a way that we can keep our plans off the shelf because you're consistently referencing it. This is a little bit, this line item is a little directed more towards staff, but let's earmark grant opportunities that come up throughout the year to prepare ourselves to apply next year. So it's more sustainable to be prepared prior to submitting the grant rather than seeing the grant window open and then wanting to apply. That way you can build your case the year prior. Mr. Duval, you mentioned the importance of a priority meeting. That's a great step every year for you guys to get together, identify your priorities moving forward. And then it's also a great practice to construct or create a yearly report highlighting the progress that you've made or the steps that you've taken to attack some of those goals and policies and action items. You'll find in the action item section that is meant to be a tool that you put in your tool belt to help you do your jobs on the Planning Commission. So you'll find that the action items range from a little bit vague to very complex. So the hope is we can break down some of those action items to help you problem solve. Some of it's programming based, some of it's project based, some of it is funding based. So I would encourage you to take a perusal through those action items. And then it's also very important to remember that a comp plan is very much a marathon. It's not a sprint. What's interesting about a comprehensive plan is the timeline sometimes that we have in our mind when we finish the comp plan doesn't always happen that way. Some of the action items in your plan are just going to happen on their own, and that's great. Some of our partners in the field are going to advance some of that work, and that's even greater. I think about our school district and all the work that they consistently do in our community. We're grateful to have them on board. The market is going to dictate some of that work. So think about back in 2007, when in 2004, we were really wanting to drive some of those housing redevelopment projects forward, and then look what happened in 2007. So the market's going to dictate some of the work that we do. But then you as a planning commission, you also get to lead the charge on how fast or how slow we progress in some of our goals, policies, and actions. In the action step, you'll find that it's assigned a timeline. We assigned a priority, but they're very similar, high, medium, and low. But you might find that it's pertinent for you to address a medium priority this year if it aligns with what you have at your working session. David has outlined a few of the tasks that we're going to try and tackle this year. A lot of that work is going to be, it's going to involve benchmarks and metrics, showing the community how we're advancing their vision for the future. So we're hoping that this plan really does jump off of the page and we can make it more of a community conversation and in front of folks all the time.
Mr. Chair.
Very good. Yes,
I
please.
guess, and that was a point I wanted to ask is, we have all of this, we've had the input and everything, how are we going to let the community know that we are, one, using the plan that they helped us, and I guess that's what I would like to know.
And that's where, when talking with Ashley, I really want to see I would like the commission to start with creating those benchmarks and metrics. Then those would be made public, maybe on the city's website. And as you know, as Ashley was talking about, as we chip away at things, maybe cross it out in your individual books, but we're also essentially making it public to the community of what's being done. And so the public can also follow along, but I also see it as it's also accountability thing.
Okay.
So they also can be saying, hey, what's being done about this? I see it's your next item. Are you working on it? So it's also accountability thing to make sure we keep pressing ahead and this stays as a living document, as you said, and doesn't become stagnant.
Mr. Chair?
Please.
One more thing. Would you mind, either one of you defining, so we're all on the same page, benchmark and metric?
So a benchmark would kind of be like, here's where we want to be at this point.
And
You
so-
know,
and that's a time-
it's kind of a timeline.
Okay.
They're goals, in a
Okay.
way. A metric would be kind of how are we going to get there, if I put it well,
Okay.
actually. We're gonna get to this goal by doing X, Y, and Z. Or this is when this goal, it might not have a very specific outcome, but this is how we are going. A metric would say, how are we going to judge success?
Okay. Okay,
Very good.
thank you.
Other questions for Ashley? Other than that, thank you so much. And I look forward to working with you over the next year.
Thank you.
Ashley, thank you for this, is beautiful.
We're a bunch of geeks. We've been waiting for this.
Kudos to all of your hard work and dedication for the plan.
Yeah, we did something.
So, Mr. Chair.
Please.
If I may. So again, tonight's putting it on here, it wasn't because I don't necessarily expect the commission to kind of set the goal for the next year tonight. I wanted, again, this was the idea with this meeting, start the discussion. Talking about, on a workshop, I think this would be a great item when we're talking about planning of the year. Let's have this discussion at that workshop. I think, again, this comprehensive plan goes heavily into what you're going to be discussing, what you're going to decide you want to do over the year. The zoning code update and the comprehensive plan go hand in hand. They support one another. They inform one another. So those, between the comprehensive plan and the zoning update, I think those two items, planning the year, would be pretty much, I think, great topics for that workshop. And honestly, I think just those two items alone would cover a good amount of time in that workshop.
I would agree. Mr. Duvall?
Question for David. David, how does, and maybe Ashley would share an insight, how does the future land use map fit in the chronological order of the updating the ordinance? Which would come first? Do they come independently? Can you share
So
a
as
thought
part
on
of the
that, please?
comprehensive plan process, as you may remember, I think about midsummer last year, one of the things we discussed was, it's not uncommon that during a comprehensive planning process that the updating of future land use map is kind of part of that process. However, to keep things moving, the commission decided that, you know what we're going to do is have that be maybe item number, one of the first items we do once it's implemented. So with that being said, I think that's definitely something to discuss at that workshop. I think it's something that should probably be done early, because it's not, doesn't, a future land use map, again, it's not what you are doing now. It doesn't affect, your zoning map and your future land use map are separate items, but it is going to help inform what when you're looking at a zoning code update, you're going to want to, if you do something that supports your future land use map. You don't want to have a future land use map that says we want to do this in this currently undeveloped area, but then create a code that doesn't support that plan, that vision. So I would say that's probably one of the first things you would want to do, and that's something we can kind of maybe outline and discuss at that workshop.
Great, thank you, David.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
David, would you be able to have I would like to see both that, the zoning and the land.
We can bring the,
Could we bring that to our
Workshop?
our meeting? And I would ask if we could have it a little bit bigger than this,
yep,
so old eyes can see it? Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Right?
I don't want to bring a magnifying glass.
A little bit of dignity, please. Exactly. Are we good with that discussion? Jennifer, please.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, first of all, I just want to congratulate you. That is an amazing document. I've had the opportunity to peruse. I'm looking forward to digging more into it. In a prior city that I worked for, we also did a comprehensive plan update, and I know how much work goes into these plans. I attended a couple of the community meetings, and it was really exciting to hear the community's input on what they'd like to see in their own city. So anyway, I really just wanted to say congratulations. Nice work, David. And Ashley, really, it's a great document and what a lot of work, so thank you.
Thank you. All right, very good. We are, at that point,
I just want to, little.
yes.
So we don't have to update this until 2035?
No, as in when I say no, as in what I think our goal is with this, again, by it being a living document, one other thing that I did do is in the city's capital budget, we plan 10, 20, 30 years out for that. I have preliminary kind of put in there, obviously, dependent on council approval each year. About every 3 to 4 years, I've put a little money away, about $5,000
Okay.
or so. So every 3 or 4 years, we actually are going back and looking at it and going, where have we come? How what have we accomplished? What new things have come up? What is our community look like? And now do we need to amend things, add things, change things? Because other priorities have come up that have bumped other priorities. So again, while this document idea is, we were looking 10, 20 years out, the idea is that, again, it's living, and maybe every 3 to 4 years, we're actually taking a soft look at it and amending it as necessary.
And Mr. Chair?
Please.
Again, I would like to recommend as we change on this, and if the commissioner would be willing to give their well-used book to you, so at the updates, there will be some other, those ideas.
Continuity.
Just because that, I might be somewhere else by that time,
You'll be right here.
Nonsense, yes.
Sorry, it's been decided. All right, very good. With that, are we ready for number 7? Commissioners, questions and comments? Anybody have anything?
All I'm going to say, it's great to work with you guys again
All right,
another year.
likewise.
Now, Mr. Chair, I have an item that I'd like to kind of step through. As a member of this commission, you get the exciting stuff of working on the comp plan and trying to envision down the road what this city can be and is heading to be. You get to do the thoughtful stuff about how you rework an ordinance that is functional and user-friendly and all those sorts of things. One of the challenging areas that we work on is what to do with proposed activities that don't fit neatly into the code and require some sort of a variance in order to be able to to proceed, if you would, with the proposed activity. And one of the areas I've struggled with quite a bit is this concept of practical difficulty. And David, do you have access to the document that I had
I'll
sent
pull that up right
you?
now.
You know, I look at the aspects of the current code, and I try and apply that, and there's words that I think are fairly clear. There are words that are vague or subject to interpretation. And so as I've looked at over the past year being on this council or commission at various variance requests, I struggled to be able to navigate through in a consistent way or in a way that I think is fair. And so I wanted to share my thoughts on this, hopefully have some discussion from my peers who have been through the same journey. And are we seeing the application of this the same way, and some guidance from staff on how we might want to think about the concept of practical difficulties in a way that we can consistently hit this thing on the head. So I'm going to step through just a few slides here, or on your monitor of aspects of our code. In Section 7, variances may be granted when the application or the applicant establishes there are practical difficulties in complying with the zoning ordinance, right? And so the next slide kind of gets at what this part of practical difficulties. There's actually a preceding section of that code that says, a variance can only be issued if it's compatible with the general purposes of the ordinance, number one. And then the second aspect of that is, David?
The comprehensive plan.
It's supported by the comprehensive plan. And so first of all, there are these pieces, and we've navigated through some of that in our deliberations last calendar year. So this gets at really now narrowing down to this concept of the practical difficulties piece. And in subdivision 4, it says that practical difficulties as used here has this meaning. And number one, the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the ordinance. Second is that the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property not created by the landowner. And finally, that the variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the locality. So you're not doing something totally crazy and putting up a Ferris wheel in a residential neighborhood as an example, right? So this is kind of the guidance that we're given, and we're trying to implement and evaluate a variance request against. So the next slide I'm going to use as an example, not to criticize us as a commission of decisions we've made, nor do I want to revisit anything, but it really helps me to think about in the questions we're reacting and trying to make good decisions that are well supported by our ordinance and our comp plan. So in this instance, was a garage proposed, which is the black outline, to be rebuilt. The part of that would be that there's an existing garage that's currently encroaching on the sidelines. That was going to be taken down, and so the bigger garage is being moved back. And then there is also a proposed accessory structure on here, that a shed that's going to be removed by that. And the proposed new garage was not going to be any closer to line than the existing. So you're not increasing the encroachment on the property line here. So you're just saying, I'm going to work with the existing garage, and I'm going to basically put a new garage, on the lot in a different spot. Getting at is this a reasonable use? Yes. Right. I mean, to want to build a garage to contemporary standards of today versus the old narrow garage that was there is a reasonable use. So it kind of checks as you step through those choices. You check these things off. Dave, could I have the next slide, please?
Yes.
So so this variance was granted, and sort of the wins that came from our deliberations and such was that the new garage is going to be located further away from the neighbor's house. So that that gets that thing right, the existing building away from right adjacent to the house and moves it a little bit further away. So there's that feeling from the adjoining property that, okay, there's a little more breathing room. You're going to lose an accessory structure as a result of that. They're going to take the shed off of the property, so you get fewer buildings there. So those are all wins. There's some missed opportunities when I looked at that, and I couldn't quite figure out in the meeting how to be able to articulate those. But one of those is that you went from a 20-foot garage to a 28-foot garage along the same property line. So while you didn't move anything closer to the line, you had you now increased how much building was there against that line in that setback. So is that an increase in, should we think about that as an increase in encroachment there? The question about could you move it someplace else on the property? Well, in order to move it, I would lose access. If we moved it further to the center of the lot, I would lose access to being able to pull into one of the garage stalls. It's like, well, that's not practical, So I think through that decision process, it became, reasonable in our vote. Next slide, please, David. I had the opportunity to rethink about this. And a couple of things that struck me in rethinking this is to say, what were the principal goals? Number one was to have a garage that is more contemporary, to today's contemporary standards for a garage. And number two, that I can get in and out of it, right? And so I played around a little bit. And one of the other things was the challenge of the drawing that we had showed fairly parallel lot lines when in fact there's a slight wedge to this thing, this lot, so it grows by 8 feet from front to back. So when you look at the drawing and you try and think spatially about it, this is not by any intent to deceive or anything, it's just how the drawing was provided. But it limited my thinking about how we could accommodate the structure. So recall that this particular lot was a legal non-conforming lot because it was basically in an R1A district, and it was narrower than the set dimensions, and the setbacks were the piece that was forcing and brought this as a variance request to us. But as I looked at this and I redrew this and I turned that building, the net effect is that I could fit that building into the existing R1A setbacks. And so that got me to the question about the plight of a landowner due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. And that's the discussion piece I was hoping to maybe have here and some feedback from staff on that is that a reasonable application? If I can fit a proposed structure within the existing building setback, despite the fact that it's a non-conforming lot of illegal non-conformity, do I have the basis to grant the variance anymore? Or now, because I'm able to meet the goals of being able to fit the structure without redesigning it, that I have the approaches to be able to get in and out of it, which was another limiting factor. Is that now, does that now become the circumstance created by the property owner if they want to keep it in that side setback area? So those were some of the challenges that I thought, and so I think I have one more slide here just to try and capture my overall thoughts about this. Is because it was a legal nonconformity, to me it just kind of says, okay, maybe that's not always going to represent a practical difficulty. If you added, say, slope, right, a hill rolling away, now there's a dimension to me that gets at some of the topographical things that then say, because of that hill, I can't put it in that box, I've got to slide it to the side. And then, the idea of thinking about, as I looked at it, my challenge was I looked at it with these straight lines, that the box lines are parallel to the lot lines. So an alternative solution that I could have inquired about with the applicant just didn't present itself because I limited my thinking to straight lines. And then again, that the site the site plan, the sketch itself, it truly indicated clearly 68 feet on the back lot, 60 feet on the front lot. So the information was there, but I didn't see the opportunity for how that opened up space in the back for this thing to go. So that's the place where I'm struggling with, and whether this, whether I can come to terms with the practical difficulty piece in examples like this or not. So I'm curious what others
No, did you want to, did you?
Go ahead, Jan.
Oh, okay, thank you, Chair.
Yes, please.
Well, going back to that, a couple things on here. The portion where you put the garage in, now, to me, that becomes a difficulty because it does not, it changes the character of that house with the rest of the neighborhood. It takes most of the yard away, I think. I mean, going
Make it
back.
hard to mow.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
and I think, so now that would become a different, that would then become, to me, that would be a reason to grant the variance for myself, if I'm making a choice. The other thing, and I guess I want to ask, because it was a non-conforming R1A, why couldn't we made it conforming? And, why couldn't we made it a conforming parcel?
So, when Commissioner Voss messaged me, and we shared a little communication, and one thing I think was brought up a little bit at that meeting when we discussed this, it was part of the items that was in my findings of fact. It was an item that was specifically mentioned by the commission in their motion, was that if this was just an R1 zone, so drop the A, it wouldn't even had to have come before the commission. This goes all the way back to when that Graydon neighborhood was zoned, and I honestly would have to dig and figure out when it was zoned R1A, why it was zoned R1A, all those kind of things. I think one of the reasons probably, again, why it might have been zoned R1A is because R1A, what it does is it creates, again, more of that, I'll call it suburban type feel. The main differences between an R1 and an R1A is lot size. An R1 has a minimum lot width of 50 feet with a minimum lot area of 7,000 square feet. An R1A has a 75-foot width minimum and a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet. So that's what you're looking at. Now, one of the problems, the consequences we could say, that we face when we did kind of that mass rezoning of that area is not everything in that Graydon neighborhood was necessarily constructed, kind of what we discussed before about zoning and trying to fit one building standard to a separate zoning standards. Not everything was built with that suburban area in mind. And actually, as you go, I would say the more northern sections of that Graydon neighborhood, those earlier developed sections, like this piece of property was developed with that earlier smaller lot in mind. So one of the options could have been to rezone it, just to simply rezone it. Again, that was not the request that was made, so you'd have to come back and go through the process again to rezone it. I will admit that if you want to do a rezoning from R1A to R1 for just this property, I honestly would probably say I probably would, as a staff, wouldn't have supported it, purely because of, one, it would have been a spot zone, which generally aren't recommended. We do them, but in this situation, you'd be doing one parcel from R1A to R1. So single family to single family, and you're just making that one lot. So what I would have suggested, if you want to make the parcel conforming, then actually just rezone the entire neighborhood, which has its own process, its own political aspects to it. And then by doing that, you also would have been requiring, in this situation, one thing I shared with Mr. Ball is you would have been requiring the property owner to delay their process while we do our process, and that may or may not happen. Hence, coming forward and requesting the variance. So if that answers your question, why don't we just
It
rezone
does,
it?
and I don't like doing variances. I think our ordinance should be to the point where we should have very, very limited variances. And so, for me, I would still have, even with this, even though he would have been in the lines, I would still consider it a variance, to grant a variance, because this I do not feel is in the character of the neighborhood. So that is just, and it's, I mean, the plight of the landowner is very, very hard, because to them it's a plight.
And,
Right.
and two, couple things that, I share with Mr. Duval, and a couple things I fully understand where he's coming from. As you said, variances, there's specific criteria for your reason, because you are giving someone the right not to follow the code. You're giving them an exemption for some reason, and we can't be arbitrary and capricious when it comes to those exemptions. I will say, I believe that the code, when you look at that section of the ordinance, it gives a couple of criteria, but they're short, so it does leave interpretation up to local bodies, local planning commissions, local city councils to decide what is a difficulty, what do we consider difficulty, what do we consider a hardship. Also, with that being said, one of the things, I have spoken to in the past to our city attorney about is, I know some people have concerns like, well, if we do this one, what about the next person? And the fact is, cities do not set precedent. So you don't, if we have, again, we can't be arbitrary and capricious about the standards we are setting, and we should be consistent about that standard. But allowing one reason, each request is considered in of itself. What are its characteristics? What is its situation? And we don't use that on someone else. We can maybe go back to that one and say, well, in this case, we allowed it because we considered this, but maybe this one is different because there's a hill involved versus it's flat. The lot wedge is funny. The last one didn't. Things like that.
I want to make a couple points. This is the document I found from the League of Minnesota Cities. I'm a big fan of the LMC, and what they are is essentially the Minnesota cities all together, and it's an organization that really helps cities figure out things, give them a lot more legal strength that you wouldn't otherwise have in opinions, and they have a really good information memo on land use variances. This has helped me understand variances a lot, and going back to this, I've gone back to this many times. It'll go through the reasonableness, the uniqueness, the essential character, talks a little bit about some of the legal precedents, why we're in this situation right now. There was a Supreme Court case, and it was 2011, 2012, that was pretty significant, talking about resetting how cities can do this and setting the standards for it. So I would suggest to any commissioner that wants to get a little better handle on it to download the information memo on land use variances. It's good stuff.
And I think part of this also, which I would hope is, this is one of the reasons I think that we're going through this zoning code update.
Exactly.
As we discussed, I think, Commissioner Duval, you hit it right in the head. When we're doing this, we need to talk about what are the things that we're missing, what are the things that we keep seeing. If we keep seeing something, that means it's probably, that section of the code's probably broken and needs to be addressed. And I think if we do this code update the right way, we should see variance requests drop. Hopefully.
Specifically, the conflicts between 1 and 1A. This has come up,
Yes,
at least
yeah.
once or twice last year, 1 and 1A.
Or, 1A, we're looking, things of what do we do with neighborhoods that, we just saw it with that other one that we had to address, we fixed the minutes on of, again, these are properties, you look at North Brainerd, Northeast Brainerd, South, and most of Brainerd. These are properties that were built around the turn of the 20th century, different standards.
Yeah.
And then we have now tried to pigeonhole them into a code. How do we
Yeah.
fix our code? Obviously not to necessarily allow people to do whatever they want. Next thing you know, we got behemoth garages that look unsightly and But how do we do it that encourages, one of my things as I look at our communities, how do we create a code that keeps essential character, is respectful to neighbors, but also allows people to improve and encourages improvements. Encourages people, they've got a dilapidated, torn down garage, but they're resisting doing anything with it because it's currently grandfathered and they would never be allowed to have anything else. How do we fix that?
Yeah.
Right. Very good. Any other comments on Commissioner Duvall's comments?
Well, I would like to, if I may, just drill a little further down on this, and the fact that the structure fits into the allowable envelope, if you would, of setbacks and things, gets at, it makes for an ugly backyard. I concur with that, but is that a practical difficulty? If I had a much larger building envelope, and I wanted to put something in the setback because I didn't want to mess with where the kids like to play, pick up sandball, or, sandlot baseball or something like that, I mean, would we vote the same way? Would we have that same feeling? And that gets at the question of consistency in my heart. I've been trying to look at it and say, okay, the fact that I can put the structure in the allowable building envelope, if you would, and it meets the objectives of the applicant, do we any longer have the practical difficulty? Does it pass the practical difficulty test number 2 or not? And if I propose to do this on my backyard and want to put something in that setback because I want to maintain the yard in a certain way, or nobody else has a diagonal garage, would we allow a variance in that case or not? And my get would be no, but I don't know. But that's where I struggle with applying the consistency. When I look at one of these and I see, there's no topographic feature that forces you out of the building envelope with a reasonable structure, there's no other reason than it's easy to connect a fence to, or the other one's in that same line, so why can't I just do the same thing? So are there any reactions to how you might think about if we packaged it differently and if it looked like a bigger lot that was already conforming and not a legal nonconformity? Would you think about it differently? I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
But,
Well, it's good food for thought.
but if it was illegal conforming, we wouldn't be having a variance.
If I wanted to put it in the setback.
If you wanted to put it in the setback.
Take the same elements that maybe there's an existing garage that's in that setback that we're gonna remove, even though there's plenty.
The same, okay.
Take the whole thing, but it's now not a legal non-conforming lot. Would we look at it the same way? Would we take those same elements and would we say that it's not in character to move it off of the line, or that it's reasonable to have a nice yard for the kids to play pick up baseball, And those are all reasonable things too. And that's the struggle of the stuff that gets handed to us. And we've looked at a few that sort of fit that bill last year. So how do we think about those things? Does your perspective change on that if you change one finding of fact from legal non-conforming lot to now a conforming lot of record?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
for me, because we're supposed to look at this on a based,
Case by case?
Case by case, thank
Okay.
you. Case by case. That's what I have to do, is look at it as a case by case. With that scenario, if there is probably not any other issues, there's a good possibility I would deny the variance as long as everything else. But with this one, I still think that there was a difficulty. So, and so I think it's hard to say to be consistent, you can't be consistent on a case-by-case thing. I mean, there's things that change. And other times it's you're up to.
And I think maybe what Commissioner Duval is addressing, and I would, echo that point, is not necessarily, are we consistent in saying, obviously it's case by case, but is our approach consistent?
Okay.
Are we looking, this situation, this one is non-conforming, the other one, maybe if it's not non-conforming, is the approach consistent? When are the things that we're considering, are we not, this one we considered all these things, this one we considered all these things and didn't, are we considering all the same things? Are we considering the whole picture? That's how I think maybe, I might be wrong with trying to put words in your mouth.
I'll take your friendly amendment.
Okay.
But, that's kind of, I think I would see it as, yes, it's case by case, but we should be consistent. And I think this past year, as I mentioned to Commissioner Duval, has been definitely a learning process, I think, for myself and for the rest of us. And I think moving forward, we absolutely can be definitely doing our due diligence with all those kind of things of looking at, is this an opportunity? Can we move it? And, with most of these things, a lot of people say, with most of us, when we have a project, we want to get it done. We want to get it done now. We want to keep moving ahead. We're excited about it. But there might be times where it is the commission's and staff's responsibility to say, we're going to bring it back. We want to come back and we want to consider, we want to think on it. We want to see, are there alternatives, and come back next month. There's a reason our ordinance doesn't say that it must be a decision by the commission at that meeting. We have 60 days, there's time within the ordinance that allows, if it needs to be revisited, for revisiting. And I don't think that the commission should necessarily feel like they are pigeon. I don't want the commission, obviously we don't want to be stretching things out and become one of those cities that, development takes 365 days to happen. But we should be doing our due diligence. And if there are times where the commission goes, that we might want to consider other things, then I think it's the commission's prerogative and their duty to say, we're going to table this to next time, and we want to spend the next 3 weeks looking at other opportunities.
Not sure what we did with the lighting ordinance. It was a different matter, but that's what we did. We kicked it down. We kicked it along until we were comfortable with it. And it was in the
Again,
right
with
shape.
these kind of variances and stuff like that, applications, we are time constrained. But again, time constraints generally allow for at least 2 meetings. So,
To get back to what both of you say, so what you're saying, do I consider these 3 items when I'm looking at a variance?
we should be looking at those items, but also looking at, looking at the items, how do they act together? In each situation, one of these 3, all 3 of these tests should be met to be in a variance, but maybe in each item, one of these is probably going to be more relevant than others. But again, they still should be all considered.
Yep.
Well, yeah, no, but that's why that's why I would say
That's
this, but
how
yes,
you're-
yeah.
How you're applying those standards in
Yeah,
your
yeah, so, I think it's just very, very difficult, because we all have our personal experiences or something that deal with it. I would, and I'm sure David would be the one to do it, if somebody comes in a variance and there's a different way of going around it, something else, you would encourage them to go the other way.
Oh,
Not
absolutely.
necessarily just say, I think you'd be better off going this way. And with looking back at the, remember that little house that they wanted to put the bigger garage on, and it was the water, and they ended up buying the other lot. That is a way where we did deny it, went to city council, honored ours, and then he worked out a way to.
Solution.
The solution.
To confirm, yep.
So, I think it's good discussion. I'm glad you brought it up, because we
Once again, I'm going to pitch this memo from the LMC. It's really good stuff because it goes into the details. It explains the background, explains how you should look at the criteria, how some criteria are worth looking at, such as neighborhood opinion, but they're not the overriding thing. You can look at neighborhood opinion, but you've got to meet the other criteria as well. So,
And may I say, what is that education that for planning and zoning, that would be great.
The ongoing-
We would really like, are you?
Government services training one?
well, that's what I was in my,
It's a,
it's through LMC, isn't it? Isn't it through these people that
Which
do it?
one?
no, it's the one, it's for land use, there's a land use, class, it's in fact, it's a 3-day conference, usually in September. I want to say GPS or GSP.
GTS, or GST,
Yes.
Government Services Training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that is, if you have an opportunity, and I think I went, the city paid for me, that would be great.
Wasn't this what, when Osgarden was here, when I first started on this group with Osgarden, there were some dates, they didn't work for me, but there were dates, and the agreement was that the city would pay if you would go.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And
that still
so,
stands that way.
I think that's worth revisiting again, and opportunities to get a little
And I will
smarter.
definitely look into if the commissioners,
Yeah.
what dates will be
Yeah.
this year, what trainings are available, and just keep you apprised of what
Yeah.
they are and what's available.
Be one of my commissioner comments, because that's what I was thinking, it'd be good to,
Yeah, it's, the one I went to was in September to October. It was a 3-day, it was phenomenal. And
Cool.
you weaved your way through what you wanted.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for letting me monopolize this part of the agenda for the moment. You know, we're not site designers. I don't think we should be. Staff probably shouldn't be, but they have the insights to be able to ask the right kinds of questions. So, you know, this is one of those extreme examples and exercises of saying, you know, how can you, and whose onus is that? Is it ours to try and, you know, bring that solution, or is it like that Second Avenue project where the action that the commission took resulted in the applicant taking finding his own solution, which was very amenable, and it made compliant lots out of things as well.
Right.
So, thank you.
very good.
Thank you, I was glad you brought that up.
Any other questions or commissioner comments, questions? I have a brief one. It has to do with streaming. We stream now, which, these meetings, I think is phenomenal. And I would sure like to think that when we go back to the city, back to our regular haunts over there at City Hall, that we continue to do this. And this is probably a matter for the cable board or somebody like this. But to me, the days of putting meetings on the city council or on cable, it should be done. Just move along. Everything should be streamed. I know we're able to use the great technology the county has here to stream these meetings. If you haven't gone to the city's YouTube channel yet, go to it, check it out. There's 2 people watching tonight's meeting. I think actually I counted as one of the 2 people.
My wife might be the other.
Might be the other. Yeah. So that's it. There's 2, but it's there. And the other point is you can watch it anytime you want. You don't have to remember Monday night too, or whatever night it is to watch the city council or anybody. It's always there. And my second and last point is this room has terrific microphones.
Yes.
And one of the things that's different about this, when we were over at City Hall, the screen would be dead silent until the gavel went down and then the sound came on. It's not so in this case. If you happen to watch the stream, the first few minutes of the stream, it's all us talking and chatting and talking about what we did over the weekend. And as well as anybody out there, the microphones are picking up everything. And so it's just something for me that, at least a memo to myself, to be conscious of that we're very live here. Even before the gavel goes down, we're live, and we're live after the gavel goes down. And so just something to keep in mind. But again, anything we can do to continue the streaming when we get back to City Hall is just, that is the way to go, to actually make it so people can practice what I like to call couch democracy.
Well, but we have to remember there's a lot of people that don't have the ability.
I think there's
Technology.
more people, I am willing to propose that there are more people who have access to YouTube than there are a charter cable channel 181. I'm just putting it out there. We'll do research on that. It's an
I
open
have- I
topic.
have,
Maybe we can do both. Maybe we can do both.
Yeah,
Maybe it's not a choice, maybe it's not an either or choice.
I
But
know what, You write a recommendation to city council, you say
right.
approved on it. Planning
All right.
commission will submit the budget.
Yeah, right. But
No, I agree with you. I
yeah.
agree. I think,
Maybe we can do both. Maybe it's a false choice to say whether it has to be on cable or on YouTube. But I just think the days of having to have a cable subscription in order to watch your city council, watch Democracy in Action we should get past that. Anyhow, that was my spiel. Anybody else have a spiel?
well, all I want to say add on that, I would like to see our website utilized for some of this stuff.
Right. Oh, and over the last year, especially, I thought the city's social media presence, at least it was a presence at this point, and that was good to see. And again, with a certain age group, social media presence is a lot more important than a website. There's a certain age where people don't go to websites. Everything's social media driven. And you can interlock it with your websites, but it's just kind of a different world, and I think we need to be conscious of that. So with that, I'm willing to move on to point number 8. That would be our Community Development Director's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I only have a few things. One, again, I want to welcome Commissioner Calroos to the commission. Also, again, want to thank Commissioners Bursley and Marone for their service on the commission over the last 4 years. The other thing, again, things I just want to hit on are really looking forward to this next year. I'm looking forward to having our workshop in February. I think that's going to be a very good kind of setting that tone for the next year, what the commission wants to accomplish outside of obviously, get, any permits that come our way. But other than that, what other things, regular agenda items does the commission want to address and start working through? And then finally, again, just a reminder, just put it out there again, we will be meeting on Wednesday, January 29th, here in the Crow Wing County Boardroom for a special meeting at 7 p.m. And just a reminder again, if we can have, when we have that motion to adjourn to that special meeting, that would be greatly appreciated.
Very good. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn to the special meeting on January 29th
At 7 o'clock
at
here?
7 o'clock at the same place.
I'll make the motion.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Good night.
Oh, Dave takes care of this.